Zoe. I was trying to start the video, but I see that that is not an option. It's fine. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for the official launch of the Trans Rural Narratives book today. I think this has been a long time in the making, basically 2 years of traveling the lengths and breadths of South Africa and visiting a rural-based context to get a sense of what the particular challenges are that trans and gender diverse persons experience and how they can inform our advocacy as an organization. At the same time, it has also been a process of noting and acknowledging and recognizing the beautiful things that's also happening within our rural-based communities and how we find meaning and belonging with others that are non-queer identifying and non-trans identifying. And of course, these particular narratives are then located within the book as particular ways in which we can also shape belonging for other communities that's not necessarily rural-based in the South African context. With that being said, I want to thank the team for having dedicated yourself throughout this particular process and for finally getting us to this place of launching the Rural Trans Narratives book. For some of you who do not know, the book is actually consists of 2 separate standalone books. The one consists the poetry or the poems that was written by all of the participants, the co-authors, to this process. And then the second component then encompasses the research element around then delving a little bit more in depth into the lived realities of our siblings. In looking at the significance of this particular resource, I think for me personally, I come from a rural town in South Africa called Darling. Many of you might know, I speak about it very often, and I've been there for the duration of lockdown with my family because it was quite isolating in town, having to stay alone and not be surrounded by loved ones. So I have a very close affinity to the book and what it seeks to achieve within rural context, knowing that these are often contexts that are defined by us not having access to the required resources, for example, such as gender-affirming healthcare, based on how the healthcare system has been shaped to initiate care at a tertiary level, and then, of course, the impact that has for us within rural-based context. Secondly, based on the fact that we are unable to access gender-affirming healthcare, it also means that we are unable to access legal gender recognition within our country context because the law is so medicalized. It requires medical proof be submitted with our application before we even stand a chance of that application being successfully received by a Home Affairs official. So I think the book in itself tries to navigate our understandings of what would become necessary in the coming months and year for our advocacy and how we're championing both gender-affirming healthcare as well as legal gender recognition for trans and gender diverse persons on the terms stipulated within the book in itself. So the book provides us with an opportunity of understanding new ways of how we can define trans and gender diversity. So for many of us, we have become accustomed to a very Western way of understanding our identities in context of gender terms. But what we also know is that within our rural context, we have different ways in which we describe who we are, in which we identify who we are to our communities. And the book in itself then troubles the way in which Western discourse do not particularly have very significant importance in how we describe ourselves, but trying to seek to find a connection between the two and how we then use that in a meaningful way to champion our rights within our country. I think this has also been an important opportunity for us to try and bridge the divide that often exists between urban context and rural-based context, so that our rural-based communities have access to the same type of resources that our urban-based counterparts have access to. And I perhaps want to nuance that a little bit by stating that not all urban-based persons even have access to the required resources for dignity to be lived by us. If I particularly look at our peri-urban context, on the margins of our cities, and we know that a lot of our siblings do not have access to a Grote Schuur, to a Baragwanath Hospital, to Steve Biko Hospital, etc., to get access to the services that we need. And so the book in itself incorporates elements of those peri-urban narratives as well, to be able to bridge these divides that exist within our own communities. I think I'm going to pause it there for now and let the team speak a little bit more in depth as to this book that is centralized on putting the interests and the needs of rural-based trans persons frontline and center, as we then incorporate understandings for purposes of advocacy. I do want to thank every person that was involved within the creation of this resource. And I want to mention them. From GDX's side, Zoe, I just want to thank you for also stepping in towards the tail end of the process and wrapping things up with Sondre, our research coordinator, and Mia Strand and Estienne Smith that has been leading this particular process from a research vantage point. I think I also just want to give a shout out to Grayson for the incredible work that you've done in leading this process across the country, in setting up community consultations, in setting up interviews with our counterparts, our siblings, and be able to ensure that people do feel dignified in the process of sharing narratives. I want to particularly thank the co-authors for the amazing contributions that you've provided us in the poetry book, and then of course within the research component, which is the focal point of this discussion today, and for candidly sharing those narratives. And of course, also thank you for everybody that's on the call once more. We look forward to receiving any comments, questions, or feedback that you might have in order to strengthen the conversation and then bridge the divides that exist within our own community and cultivate a greater sense of solidarities as we move forward, both within South Africa, but also at a regional level with our Southern African counterparts. Thank you so much, and I look forward to robust and very productive conversations today.
Thank you so much for that, Liberty. I'm going to hand over to Mia Strand now to give us an overview of the book's research methodology. Mia?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mia, and I've been very lucky to be part of the research and writing up of the final product of the book. And I'm super excited to be here today. And I could not be more excited about sharing this book with everyone and with all the amazing co-authors that have been part of this. I want to extend my thank you, just as Liberty did, to everyone that's been part of this. I know it's been a long, bumpy ride of 2 years, but it's been such an amazing process. And I think I can't thank the co-authors enough for what they've been sharing with us. And so I want to just briefly introduce our research methodology behind this book, and kind of just say that we started thinking about this project with recognizing the need to include more perspectives from trans and gender diverse people from rural areas of the country to actually inform policymaking and advocacy efforts. And as Liberty said, not just from urban areas, or also not just from privileged white spaces. And what we see is that when you go to the current research and the theory and methods, a lot of that comes from a very Western white privileged space. just like me. And we need to highlight how and why this is an issue. And for example, throughout history, a lot of African sexualities and gender identities have been framed within a medicalization theme or portrayed as different or violent, and this is overshadowed sexual health, wellness, issues of self-identification, which is what this book wants to make space for and wants to highlight. But instead of just critiquing methods that have been in the historical perspective, we wanted to provide an alternative and work towards a contextual Black trans theory and methodology, which can actually highlight the specific place and culture you're born into, how race, class, gender identity, and sexuality defines your everyday life and your lived experience. And that is why the book has been based around participatory research, where the co-authors have been an integral part of defining the conversations and the questions we've been talking about and the themes that are mentioned throughout this book. And it all started in Saldanha Bay, where we were able to kind of start some of these conversations and talk about some themes, for example, language, how that can be a massive barrier, and unpacking big words like transphobia and intersectionality, and what it even means to be trans and gender diverse in a South African rural context, which I think comes from this book, shows that can be so many different things. And then
apologies, Mia. Lindani, would you be able to switch off your mic, darling? Lindani? Oh, excellent, thank you.
Perfect. But yes, that comes back to the point of language, and how even though the first draft of the book is in English, an aim is, of course, to publish in all South African languages and trying to make it more accessible for everyone. And throughout the process and the research process, and when we've gone to the different communities in the different provinces, we've been incorporating different themes and different questions and kind of unpacking things that needs to be unpacked when it comes to sharing lived experiences and when it comes to access to legal gender recognition. And what is very important is that the methodology, being a participatory research methodology, means that the co-authors have been in part of the whole process of the research methods. And even now, with the final draft, we really encourage the co-authors' feedback on what we've included and not included in the final product so that we can make changes to that. But yeah, it ended up basically being a lot of conversations where we finally been able to kind of convey a lot of the co-authors' lived experiences. And I must say that the end product of this book is only due to them and to all the co-authors and the people with GDX, such as Linda and Grayson, that have been part of the whole research journey. And the book's importance stems from the co-author's ability to highlight the barriers to legal gender recognition, where, for example, limited access to information really stands out. And I think because of that, the importance of GDX's continuous work and workshops around the country cannot be understated enough. And I think the aim of this book is to start conversations, and as Liberty touched on, we think it will be an incredibly important tool for policy change and further research. And yeah, I think we need to question question perceived truths in society and make time to listen to people's lived experiences, because that is what should inform policy change and change in society. And that is what this book aims to highlight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mia. We're going to move into the panel discussion now, which is really the center of this conversation. So as I said, I'm going to hand over to Grayson, and Grayson can introduce himself and introduce the panel. Grayson, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Zoe, and once again, good afternoon to everyone joining us for this momentous day today as we launch this very special book, as quite a number of my prior speakers have really highlighted, that when packing a book of lived experiences of trans and gender diverse persons, throughout the South African context, just thinking back on how this particular project started, we were in Saldanha Bay, the heart of Saldanha Bay, where we really invited individuals, trans and gender diverse persons from Gauteng, from the Free State province, from the Western Cape, as well as KwaZulu-Natal. And really the mandate was really cultivated from that specific workshop where we highlighted quite a number of the inequalities that currently exist within the South African context, and that's when the mandate was then, of course, cultivated, and we decided to embark on this journey and go from province to province in collecting these particular stories. And of course, that wouldn't have been a realization had it not been for the partnerships that we had formed throughout the country. And I'd really just like to thank, the organizations that have really played a massive role in the cultivation of this resource, such as Trans Wellness Project, Free State Rainbow Seeds, the University of the Free State, Iranti, as well as Access Chapter 2. And of course, this is just but only a few. But most importantly, I'd really like to also thank the co-authors, because without them, this wouldn't have been a reality. And this book really also just unpacks, the systems of oppression and the systems that govern trans and gender diverse bodies within the South African context. This could, of course, be systematically, this could be socially, and of course, intimately as well. And the book also highlights, the privileges that currently exist within the South African context, which speaks to access and which speaks to the different realities. You cannot debunk trans rural narratives without debunking privilege and without debunking where you are currently situated within the context of South Africa, and this, of course, the realities speak to, access to information. Mia briefly touched on language being a massive barrier. It also speaks to violence perpetrated by systems around us, by violence perpetrated by families. And of course, it speaks to access to healthcare. As trans and gender diverse persons, adequate access to healthcare, which is sensitized, is very integral to affirming our bodies and affirming who we are as trans and gender diverse persons. And of course, notwithstanding the legal challenges that currently exist in the context, this ranging from issues at Home Affairs, this ranging from issues of Act 49, which of course has been, in existence since 2003. So it's been a long time coming. It's been a long journey, with regards to the realization of these particular lived experiences, as well as unpacking the situational analysis within South Africa, which is very important, because when we unpack the lived realities, we need to question who narrates the story and who is the source, which is very important for this particular book, because who tells the story, from which body the story comes from, is very important. And of course, this touches on the constituencies who, of course, are co-authors in this book, and really thank you once again to them, as this is going to be used as a resource and a building block to further research and further publications, and of course, access to more and more information. And with that said, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Our panelists were also co-authors within this particular book. We've got Lesego Tlhabane, pronoun being he, and he is a human rights activist. He's a businessman, he's an entrepreneur, as well as a DJ, and he hails all the way from the Northwest Province in Mafikeng. Welcome to you, Lesego. And of course, we've got Honey, and Honey is a transgender woman, pronoun being she, and she's a human rights activist as well as a mental wellness activist. And of course, she comes from Eastern Cape all the way within the heart of East London. And lastly, but not least, I'd like to introduce Nelly Mahloka, who's a transgender activist as well as a trans feminist activist, and she hails all the way from the Free State in Botshabelo. My dear panelists, a good welcome to you today. With that said, I'd really like to, off the bat, just start with you, Nelly. You know, as we've been to the Free State, you know, we spent a great deal of time in the Free State. It was over a 2.5-day period where we really unpacked the lived experiences of trans and gender diverse persons within the Free State. You know, I mean, the Free State is a province that has quite a number of divides and inequalities, you know, ranging from racial inequalities, ranging from, of course, transphobia systematically, ranging from unemployment, and of course, access to information. So if you can just briefly help us in unpacking the lived experiences of our fellow siblings within the Free State province. Over to you, Nelly.
Good day, everybody. If I would unpack everything that is happening, especially to trans people, and unpack their lives of transgender people living in the Free State, I would say, especially in the rural areas, there are a lot of challenges that we are still going through. We've got very, very, very limited access to, you know, to healthcare and healthcare facilities, and we are still we still have, you know, certain cultures, like, you know, especially in the Free State, it's mostly Basotho, as we are close to Lesotho, so we still have traditional things like, you know, circumcision, you know, and we still, you know, the economical opportunities are very, very limited, especially towards the trans community, you know, and at traditional violation rights, you know, it even is before let's say before one would actually have her surgeries or even transition, you know, using hormones. Even after that, you know, we still have certain challenges that we still face every day within the Free State. And even education is very, very limited. Most of trans women from the Free State are dropping out of school, and it's because of, you know, because of things like having the legal recognition not being recognized even from high school, you know, and even at higher institutions, even though they are saying that they have instigated some of the implementations, but still, you know, in the Free State, it's still, especially if you go deep in the Free State, like for instance, mentioning access to healthcare, just to make one example, deep in the Free State, whereby you are living in Excelsior, you know, there is no access to lubricants at all, yeah, especially and condoms, you know, for trans women. They have to send one trans woman. If one trans woman is going to Bloemfontein, that's only when other trans women will be getting lubricants. And there are times and situations whereby, you know, trans women don't talk to each other, so they cannot give each other lubricants. So there are still a lot of things that I can unpack and talk about within the Free State. And most of us here in the Free State, you know, limited access to education, it's still a greater challenge.
Thank you so much, Nelly, for just, you know, giving us a brief, you know, overview of the challenges faced in the Free State right now. You mentioned quite a number of important points that I'd really like to just hone in on at this particular point in time, if you allow me. You spoke about as African people, you know, believing in African ways of doing things, believing in African theology and culture and tradition and ancestors. There's certain rituals as African people that we undergo, you know, and quite often it being very binary and very patriarchal. You know, it depends in which the sex assigned at birth, and quite often, you know, there's a huge precedence put on individuals who've been assigned male at birth, you know, in taking the lead as a patriarchal body, as a male body. And, you know, speaking to circumcision, speaking to leading African traditions at home, you know, like your mbelekos, you know, and I'd like to bring in Lesego into this conversation at this particular point, where we had a conversation about how African people, particularly trans and gender diverse people, have to constantly shape shift in order to please family within our households, whereby, you know, you affirm yourself as a trans woman, but yet you are compelled to be performing rituals because you've got male assigned at birth. And this complicates, of course, the experience, the embodied experience of a transgender person. So, Lesego, if you can just really help us unpack the cultural contradictions and the half-hearted affirmations that our families give us within this particular context in South Africa.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can anybody hear me?
Indeed, we can hear you. Thank you so much.
All right, my guy. When it comes to we're talking cultural and traditional issues, especially when it comes to family, right? I've had the challenges personally. I've had the challenges of well, luckily for me, at some point, some of my family members are really accepting of you know, me being a trans man. I remember when I came out to my family, and one of my aunts actually recognized. I think most of you would be able to recognize the late Lara Kruger. She was a very much good follower of Lara Kruger. So for her, it was simply easy to actually understand what trans, or what being trans is all about. Now we come to my grandmother. My grandmother is very traditional. My grandmother is one of those women that were raised knowing what a man is, what a woman is, what are the duties of a man, what are the duties of a woman. Now you come and you tell your grandmother that you are trans. Number one, she does not even know what the word trans means. She does not know what a trans person is, or what it means to actually be trans. I've tried to explain to her so many times, and she's still not budging. Although she is accepting, but half of her is really not understanding the whole concept. Because I remember when I came out first, I came out as lesbian. Yes, lesbian, she understood. And now comes the word trans. Okay, what is trans to her? You understand? So now becomes a very difficult, challenging issue for me at home to actually, you know, some of the duties that are expected of me. But luckily for me, growing up, I was always a boy. You know, I was always a boy, and I would always make sure that whatever it is at home that needs to be fixing, I would fix. I remember some time back, my mom would actually say to me, you know, you are actually the man of this house, you know? So I guess it goes back to the saying, you know, understanding. People need to understand first, what does it mean to be trans, or what does it mean to be, you know, a gender non-conforming person. So on my side, I'm still trying to, you know, get to the level of getting my grandmother to actually understand, because she is rural. When I say rural, she is really rural. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, I think the most difficult part is actually, you know, my grandmother. So I would just park it right there for now.
Thank you so much, Lesego, for just touching on family and experiences within the household. I mean, you really touched on language. Language is really a problem in South Africa in quite a number of ways. You know, not only in South Africa, but, you know, in the greater on the African continent. And in just talking about language, there isn't a single language in South Africa, whether it's Zulu, Xhosa, Changan, that really gives the correct representation of what trans is, or what gay is, or what lesbian is, or bisexual. You won't find a correct representation of that word in any language. The only representations that exist, or definitions that exist, are in English. So as African trans and gender diverse persons going home with that particular information and saying, Mom, Dad, I am a transgender man, they're going to look at you with very big eyes. They're going to look at you and say, what does that mean? What is that? So as Africans, we need to come to that realization that we need to take ownership of who we are and ownership of our language. And see, comrades, we need to come to the point where we translate and give proper representation and definitions of who we are in our own languages. And I'd like Honey to just come in here, from particularly from the Eastern Cape. I know it's very traditional, very rural, where you still have chiefs who are ruling. You still have chiefs who impose particular rules and particular standards of living. That quite often, if not all the time, are contradictory to our lived experiences and our bodies as trans and gender diverse persons. I remember quite vividly that visit to East London, where we gathered our fellow trans and gender diverse persons in bringing life to their experiences. And there was an individual who said that they ran away from home because they are from royalty. So now the expectation is that she has to be the chief of this particular area, which of course is contradictory to who she is as an individual. Subsequently left home and was led to fend for herself and to create a place of safety for who she is. Honey, if you can just really, just unpack for us there, from your perspective in East London, please.
Hi, Grayson. It's Zoe here. I'm not sure if Ani's has able to join the meeting. They're having major connectivity issues here. I'm trying to get in contact with them to try and get them on the call. But for now, I don't think they're in the meeting.
Thank you so much, Zoe. I'm going to throw back the question to our panelists, particularly to Nelly. Nelly, we find ourselves in a particular situation whereby we do have organizations that champion the lived experiences of trans and gender diverse persons within the rural context, isn't it? So now we find ourselves that quite often there is a shortfall in funding. There are issues in accessing funding, in basically sometimes keeping the organization afloat. And in having the conversation that we had, we really honed in on the exclusionary language that we use within our LGBTI spaces, within our trans organizing spaces, where we talk about cis-normativity, we talk about white supremacy, we talk about cisgender privilege, but really these are words that our organizations in rural communities do not use. They do not use that on a day-to-day basis. They use basic, simple language. And of course, in my understanding and in my conviction, I firmly believe that this somehow influences funding opportunities, because there's a particular standard, in communicating, there's a particular standard in accessing funding and keeping our organizations afloat. Because within the recommendations of this particular book, we really hone in on increased visibility and outreach within our rural and peri-rural areas.
It is indeed a greatest challenge, especially for the rural people. You would see that certain funders, for instance, if they need you to be writing a funding proposal, it has to be in an academic language. You understand, and because of certain circumstances, as transgender people from the rural areas, we are not able to, meet the requirements of such. That's why you would see that even somewhere, somehow, even here in the Free State, I would say, there are still, organizations that are not even translated, if you get my point. language, it is a greater challenge, but you would go somewhere, maybe in, I don't know when, maybe in Italy, and you would see that people there from that side, they are able, to apply for a funding using their own language, which becomes a greater challenge, because it is not a lot of trans people who are privileged to be able, to access a higher level education. If you get what I'm saying. So it is a greater challenge, especially when it comes to academic language, and certain standards that funding proposals has to be written. It is a great challenge. That's why you would see that in certain organizations, there is not, you'd see just one trans woman there, I don't know, maybe I would say just to play the front part or to do what. And it's about time that maybe in rural areas we would know that a trans woman without matric can be able, to even become a peer educator, because that woman will be talking about her lived experiences. She'll be talking about her life, she'll be talking about her past and her future. So it is a greatest challenge, especially when you, and there are certain things that even this language barrier, just limits us as trans women to even say our views in certain platforms. They know that if Nelly is there, Nelly will have to talk. If Masabuta is there, Masabuta will talk. If whoever is there, they'll be able to talk. And there are certain points that they can just, that are being withheld by trans women, but now they cannot come to such platforms, even one like this. They are just scared that if they come here, they'll be talking English, and it becomes a greater challenge. Hence, I'm saying, if possible, maybe one day, and I'm hoping that this book will be able to achieve, to actually say to the funders that there are people who will be able to have trans organizations, even though they will not be able to be rating their funding proposals, using big words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nelly. And at this particular point in time, I will be opening the floor to questions and comments at this particular point in time. We have unpacked, limitations to Act 49. We have unpacked the issues that trans and gender diverse persons are currently facing within the healthcare sector. I mean, we talk about uninformed healthcare, practitioners that get the shock of their lives when a trans man walks in a consultation room asking for a pap smear, and now you are left to once again educate this particular person and say, listen, this is who I am and this is what I currently need. These are barriers, simple, not even getting to the reason of your visit. You first need to educate the person about your lived experience. I mean, we've spoken about education and passing on this particular resource and education and educating others. And not only it stopping there, but it being integrated within the school curriculum, not only in basic education, but in higher education. We've also touched on the limitations to spaces of trans organizing that really just breaks that access to information and understanding. So at this particular point in time, I'm going to hand it over to Lesego, who might have a question or comment, and then give it over to the floor for any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, my guy. You touched up on a bit on tribal authority. It's unfortunate that Hani was not able to be with us to actually unpack on that issue. I will just simply unpack on my experiences or our experiences this side, because most of our villages this side are under tribal authority. Now it becomes a challenge because now, like I said, the people living here are too rural. They're too rural, they're too traditional, and to them, a man is a man, a woman is a woman. And, having to unpack to them, first of all, being lesbian, they don't understand what being lesbian is. Being trans is another thing. You're confusing them even worse. So now I've had an experience whereby I went to a funeral here at home, and what happens is when you go to a cemetery, you go to the cemetery, and when you come back, you guys go to the family's house. Now then comes the part of segregation, whereby they segregate both males and females, males on the other side, females on the other side. So I'm in a predicament at that point in time. At that time, I had not been on any hormones or whatever the case might be. So now people know me. When they know me, when they see me, they see a female. They've been seeing a female ever since. I understand. So now I'm there, I'm standing right over there thinking to myself, okay, where do I fall in this case? Because now comes the point of me being safe, because in most of our tribal authorities, we have so much patriarchy, and by virtue of that, it creates some form of discrimination, you understand, for things that they do not even know about. So I think, again, when we come to tribal authority, we should also, I think for me, it's actually one of the biggest issues, because they control what happens within the society or within the community itself. You understand? So I would really, really like that we also look into that part as well, especially the chiefs and. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. The constant contestation and negotiation of spaces. I mean, it's something that happens quite often, in peri-rural and rural areas, whereby we're negotiating the space, because I exist too, in as much as you exist. But how do we then balance the power? How then do I achieve my own agency without me superseding someone else's right to affirmation and basic human rights? At this particular point in time, I'd really like to open the floor to any questions and comments at this particular point in time with regards to our conversation. I thank you. Anyone? Not all at once, comrades.
Hi everyone, it's Katlego Gardner here, and I'm an ally. And I'm coming from a place where I suppose I don't have much of a practical experience of what it is to be trans in a rural environment. And I'm hearing a lot spoken about the role of the tribal authorities. So I just want to get a sense when it comes to the religious authorities, because you find that they're also very prominent in rural and tribal spaces. What are the challenges that are faced when it comes to, I suppose in general, and looking in a rural location, you're generally talking about a Christian community. So what work needs to be done when it comes to the religious authorities, like you've mentioned the tribal authorities? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katlego, for your question. A very important one, because our social structures, to a large degree, are governed by our faith communities, and our faith communities play an integral role in bridging that gap and really creating that conversation that is inclusionary, not exclusionary. Lesego, you've mentioned quite a bit about how your grandmother is very traditional, very religious. How is that conversation currently taking place within your context and within the greater Northwestern Mafeking context?
In terms of me and my grandmother, I never even want to touch that. I never want to touch that because I know I'll never win. I'll never win. She is very much a believer. So I never ever touch on religion when it comes to that. And in terms of our community as a whole, honestly, to be honest, I've never really engaged with any of them in that kind of a situation. So for now, I don't have much on religion per se.
Thank you so much, Lesego. I see that we have two hands at this particular point in time. I'm going to hand it over to Anthony Brown, followed by Nosipho Vudima. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to find out more and more young people embrace their transgender identities, and we find that these identities or these young people are in the schooling setup. Could you locate any information of trans learners in the school setup from a rural perspective?
Thank you so much, Anthony, for your question. I am going to throw that question back at Zoe Black because she's currently the Education and Legal Officer at Gender Dynamics, and they do have a particular program that focuses on education. So Zoe, would you kindly unpack the intersectionality or the need for inclusive integration within the curriculum and advocacy within that particular space?
Thank you, Grace, and thank you for the question. So Gender Dynamics does do work in advocacy spaces in the education sector, working both in the higher education spaces and in basic education. And so as part of our work in the basic education space, we have developed effectively what is a training manual for pre-service and currently in-service educators around concepts around gender identity, gender expression, and how that can be integrated into the existing education systems so as to provide inclusive education for the young people of our country. And so it does present a difficulty in terms of gaining access to young people in a research context, because they are, if we were to do this for minors, it does present an issue around notions of consent and how do we use that information, and then also protecting the identities of these people. But we had published a book a while ago called Young and Transgender, in which a number of people were interviewed, young people interviewed about their experiences at school level around things like their gender identity and their gender expression, as well as their access to legal gender recognition, how they were treated by their teachers, what their certain circumstances were around that, and how they felt were the best way possible to move forward in providing that kind of not just inclusive education, but an inclusive learning environment that that really facilitated the learning and the safety of trans and gender diverse persons. That book is available on the Gender Dynamics website. I think it's called, if I remember the title correctly, it's called Young and Transgender. It is available on the website, so I do encourage you to go and have a look at that. Thank you. Back to you, Gray.
Thank you so much, Zoe. And that really just also speaks to the findings of the book. That, look, we've got a huge problem in school. We've got a huge problem where teachers are exercising a degree of power over the minds of young people, where they are briefly unpacking life orientation, that, we talk about the LGBTI community, but, 2 minutes, because it's something that is deemed wrong. So really what we are asking for here is adequate education and adequate inclusive policies within the schooling environment. I know, there's something as simple as affirmation within using a young trans child's chosen name, affirming the person by letting them use their name, affirming the individual by the individual wording non-binary uniform. I mean, because at this particular point in time, there's a number of schools that have the typical girl uniform and the typical guy uniform. But why don't we create a space where it's equitable, where why don't we all just wear golf t-shirts? You know, so we're not only talking about the education that's being provided, but the physical accessibility and the mental accessibility of a young child at school. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to Nosipho Vudima, who has a question. Thank you. Nosipho, can you hear us?
Yes, hello.
Thank you. Over to you.
Hi, Grayson. It's Gavin Jacobs from Sweats that's speaking now on behalf of Nosipho Vudima. Not on behalf. Okay, well, it's on behalf of Sweat. I want to say thank you to everybody for the research and for the narrative, and also for adding your voice to calling for decriminalization of sex work. Okay, I'm a sex worker. I'm a trans sex worker, and one of the problems that we have is that we find that within our own communities, we're neither male or female. So there's a lot of problems that are attached to this. So we also then don't only get discriminated by the outside world, but also because of the stigma and the discrimination that goes with sex work. We face a double stigma from communities that are supposed to be minorities like us as well, fighting for the same thing. So we need to look at how we can educate our fellow trans persons or gender diverse communities to be more understanding of our lived experiences and to be more accepting of sex workers, especially trans sex workers, and to make it more inclusive. Because we end up not only fighting the general population to bring our point across, but also now be fighting within the community because of not accepting sex workers. Hello?
Thank you so much, Gavin, for that. Quite cool. Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. There's a high number of unemployment. There's a high number of homelessness as well amongst trans sex workers within South Africa, and not enough really is being done about this particular situation within a South African context. And this has really just been amplified through the current COVID conditions under lockdown, where there's no money, there's no unemployment, and yet you have children that you have to feed, you know, and it's high time that we really shine the light extensively on the decriminalization of sex work and the realization of bodies and their agency. Absolutely. Nigel Patel has a question. So without any further ado, Nigel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this. It's super, super exciting and looks really interesting, and I can't wait to have a proper read of it. I was interested looking through the research methodology part. There's a lot about legal reform, but I find it interesting that there's not a lot on customary law, which I imagine trans people in rural areas are engaging with. And I would talk about legal reform. I was just wondering if people had any experiences or engagement with customary law and what legal gender recognition looks like when you're interacting with a chief, or you're going from child to adult, or at a funeral, and how trans people have managed customary law in the rural areas.
Thank you, Nigel, for that question. And in answering that question, Vuyo Mbuto, who's a trans woman who's got extensive knowledge on customary law and customary practices within the Greater Free State region. So Vuyo, if you could please give us a particular response on the reform, not only legally, you know, Act 49 exists, and yes, it's got quite a number of limitations in itself as it is, but customary law, because there's a huge contestation between the legal and the customary, you know. So if you could just shine a bit of light on that particular facet.
Grayson, hello everybody. Can you hear me?
Indeed. Thank you so much, Vuyo. We can.
Okay. I've got problems with hearing you properly. Can you please just repeat the question for me, please?
At this particular point in time, we were really unpacking the current contestation and the contradictions between legal reform and the agency of trans and gender diverse persons, as well as customary reform that speaks to the agency of trans and gender diverse persons. Because yes, you are going to find trans and gender diverse persons who do not want to embark on the journey of circumcision at the mountain, who prefer to go to a health center. Also, that happens between culture and the legal. The legal says that you cannot be discriminated based on your sex and gender. And if sex and gender meant the same thing, there wouldn't be a comma in between the two words in the Constitution, as well as having Act 49 that says that you exist and you have a right to affirm who you are. So if you can just really shine a bit of light on the contradictions and affirmations of customary practices with regards to trans and gender diverse persons.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. As a gender, as a transgender person living in rural areas, looking at customary law, it's very problematic in a sense that, can you guys hear me? I feel like people don't hear me.
Indeed, we can hear you.
Okay, cool, because like network here is really, really not okay. Okay, so when you're looking at customary law and legal reform, you find that the legal aspect of the question is on our side as trans identifying people, individuals. But when we confront customary law, that's where we find that we encounter a lot of problems. Problems like you find Uguti, culture or our customs say that you are a man or you are a male, therefore you can't identify yourself as a woman, and you should therefore culturally do everything that is of a male or that is of a man. Do you understand? So we're still trying to work around getting the legal framework of the country and the constitution to properly be very specific when it comes to issues of the LGBTI in particular, not just transgender issues. We're looking at trying to make customary law to be inclined with the constitution of the country, and also make sure that customary law does not infringe upon the rights of individuals within the LGBTI space.
Absolutely. I mean, at this particular point in time, Ugutwala is still something that is legally being practiced in South Africa. I mean, could you imagine a transgender man being legally kidnapped because this particular man has seen someone that he thinks is a suitor for marriage, and without, the conversation, and not only that, but the fact that this person has a particular gender identity, and yet these are things that are still legally happening in South Africa. Colleagues, we are mindful of time as well. There were two questions. We had Melinda, who had a question, as well as Sipesetu, who had a question. While Melinda is still preparing a question, I'm going to hand it over to Sipesetu to just briefly engage us with her particular question. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Do everyone hear me clear?
Yes,
hello?
Thank you.
Okay, cool. My name is Siposetu. I am from PE. I work for South Arica. I don't have a question as such, but it's just a comment. Few incidents that we came across last year during December, when it's the time for many people to go to the mountain. And there was so much rejection to some of the initiator that they cannot take trans people in their space. So I just want to find out what other ways that trans people can be comfortable in their body and in doing what their family wants, because some people go to initiation because of their family, and yet, yeah, I know there's another part that people can go to the hospital, can go to the clinic, and there's one of our nurse that is doing it in our facility. However, some people still have to go to their parents. There's one client that wanted to be on hormones, but because she had to go to the initiation school during December, and said to me that I can't take hormones right now. I can't be on hormones at this stage because my family or my father wants me to go to the initiation and wants to throw a big giddy for me. So some situation when it comes to this narrative, it's so powerful. I really want trans people for themselves to embark and unpack it and come with their ideas. How do we convince our family that this is who I am right now? I don't feel comfortable to go to the bush. I want to go to the hospital, and then after that, I want to take hormones. I don't want anything that has to do with the way I have to change the clothes that I need to wear now, and stuff and stuff. So yeah, that was my comment on this very beautiful dialogue that we are having. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siposeti, for that. I mean, you know, you've touched on quite a number of important points, which also really speaks to going back again to the shape shifting and the constant negotiation that you need to be doing as a trans and gender diverse person for you to share equal space that really speaks to one's identity. You know, yes, I mean, as trans and gender diverse persons, there's gender dysphoria. You know, I am not willingly going to put myself or undergo a particular practice that is going to enhance or tighten that, you know. So in us looking at inclusive ways of speaking to gender identity and inclusive ways of really touching and embracing one's culture as well. Because in as much as you're affirming yourself, you also have a particular culture. You know, you also have a particular way of doing things. You have a particular way of embracing who you are as a Black African person in South Africa. Yes, some are going to go to the mountain, and some are going to want to be admitted into hospital for that particular practice. So it's really in us, you know, recreating a situation whereby it's inclusive for everyone. They say that the greatest lie to be passed on from generation to generation is it's always been done that way. That's the greatest lie that really changes and alters the lived experience of people living in the contextual now, in today's world. And this is really us in this book. That is what this book is really addressing, that guys, we really need to shape our lived experiences and change our lived realities, not only for us, but our future generation within the movement and within the greater African continent. Vuyo, I see your hand. With that said, I think Vuyo will then be our last question if there isn't another question from our participants. Vuyo, over to you.
Okay, cool. So what I wanted to go back to is the issue of the Department of Basic Education and their stance with regards to transgender learners in our schools, right? When we were writing the book, Grayson, you remember I mentioned the issue of my previous high schools, right? So what had happened was I was in a high school and then I got kicked out because I wanted to wear the girls' uniform. And then I went to the other school, which allowed me to, live as who I am in the school, like wear skirts, do my hair to school and everything, like basically live as a woman. So my question would then be, if there are schools in rural areas that are allowing us to be able to be ourselves within the school vicinity, what is then stopping the Department of Basic Education from implementing each and every this particular rule in each and every school? And then what do we do to make sure that to ensure that this law, if it's going to be passed or if it's going to be done, is put into effect and is used at each and every school?
Thank you.
Absolutely. It's very important, that the integration of inclusive education for not educating those that are not from the trans and gender diverse community, but for the greater community, for the purpose of an inclusive society. It's very important. I was really hoping that Melinda would really shed some light on DBE, because I know she's worked extensively on the Department of Education and the realization of learners who are trans and gender diverse, as also in creating inclusive policies that speaks to uniform, that speaks to teaching, which speaks to learning, which speaks to something as simple as going to a camp that is representative of everyone. Honestly speaking, you couldn't be more right, Vuyo. Melinda, would you like to just briefly, 2 seconds, just shed some light on that for us, please?
Hi, hello everybody. Hi, Gray. And huge congratulations to Gender DynamiX and all of you. I started paging through the poetry book and I had to stop because you can't put it down. So thank you, everybody. On DBE, I'll be very short. I think there is a big campaign, a legal campaign we need to launch. An enormous amount of effort has been put in by transgender activists across the country to be supportive and to assist the DBE with putting in place policy and practice for all schools to ensure the inclusion of gender diverse and transgender children. Basically, the DBE has kept us busy in meetings for over 2 years with nothing to show for all of the efforts that you all and all of us have put in. So I think the next step would definitely need to be a bigger campaign. I'm particularly concerned about their new approaches, which are entirely lacking in ethics. So I'm afraid, dear colleagues, we've got a lot of work on our hands and we're up for it. So Gray, we'll talk more about it after this fantastic launch. And again, huge congratulations to all of you. It's actually quite moving work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melinda, for that. And we will be wrapping up our question and answer session with Anil. Anil, please do take it away.
Hi, I'm Anil. I'm originally from Limpopo province, and I kind of know something about growing up in small towns and extremely conservative communities. Although obviously as a kind of privileged person, I was protected from a lot of what other people faced. But one thing that I've known is that it's made me really, really tough to grow up in that kind of environment. And I was wondering if our participants today could say something about the strengths that growing up in a rural environment give you, the skills and the strengths and the ability to really cope with all of this, and talk a bit about how this has contributed to the people who they are today.
Absolutely, Anil. You're speaking to trans resilience right there. I'd like to throw this question back to Lesego and Nelly, if you can just briefly wrap it up for us in answering Anil's question. Thank you very much.
Can I get the question once more?
Anil was really asking a brief question on the kind of resilience and skill that one really needs to maneuver and really live, and to make sure that you make it out alive in society, and because these experiences shape who you are, they shape your character, they shape your resilience, and they shape your need for self-affirmation. So Anil really just wanted to really briefly unpack what kind of skills and resilience one really gets from growing up in a rural Mafikeng, in a rural Kimberley, in a rural Botshabelo. If you can just really shed some light a little bit on that for us, please.
I think I should let ladies first. Nelly.
Oh, okay. I am, as a feminist, I think I will accept that for today, the ladies first tribe. One of the most important skill, if you are in a rural area that you get to learn is that you stop licking organizations' asses. I'm sorry to excuse my language, but you become whoever that you want, and your fighting skills are, get cultivated even by your cultural things that you are facing. And this goes even like, it goes pre-op and post-op, because irrespective of what we are saying, even if even if one would identify me as a privileged transgender woman, because I'm in the process of getting my sex reassignment. Even after the sex reassignment, I will still have to fight, and I will still have to go to the initiation school, to even to be culturally recognized as a woman. So your fighting skills, they grow, and you get to the point whereby you don't beg. If you are seeing people, even like organizations in Bloemfontein doing things that you do not like, because you're not licking anybody's frontline or their organization, you get to say what you want. And you get to learn these things of you writing a proposal. You have to Google it, and you have to go even to your mentors. Like I don't know how many times to Liberty to ask for help about certain things, and she would gladly help me. I've been going to Leanne, what I'm saying. So you get to learn all your things, and you get to learn them by yourself, and you get to learn on how to be doing things by yourself as a trans woman, and how you should also fight for yourself and fight with no organization as a trans woman living in the rural area. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nelly, for just really wrapping it up for us. Greatly, greatly appreciated. And at this particular point in time, I would really just like to close the session with a particular quote in the book, because there is hope. There is hope for the future. For as long as we can gather on platforms like these, as long as we can still congregate and just organize ourselves as a collective, COVID-19 or not, illnesses or not, as long as we can do this and say, guys, there's still some more that we need to fight for, there is still hope. And in that said, I'd like to close the session by this particular quote. It says, a funny thing happened to me during the week. When I posted on Facebook, did you see that post of mine where I said I am a trans man? Did you see the response? It was all positive. I think 100 or something comments, and all of them are positive. I expected negative comments, and not even one negative comment. Everybody was congratulating me, and some are saying they are going to support me. And this was dated 28th June 2019 by Iseho. And with that said, colleagues, I thank you so much. Thank you for the robust conversation. Thank you for the insightful knowledge. Thank you for the willingness to participate in this. And with that said, I'd like to hand over the session to Sondre. Sondre, please take it away.
Hi everyone, it's Zoe. So I'm just going to do the closing very, very quickly. Thank you, Grayson, for those words. Actually, I think that's a nice little ending to it, and I don't want to say too much in closing this, because I think that was a beautiful note to leave the panel discussion on. Thank you so much for guiding us through this conversation, and then also thank you to our panelists for your time and for sharing your experiences and your insights with us. I think this book is quite in-depth, and the findings are going to be an incredible resource tool for us moving forward in our advocacy work for the inclusion of the experiences of rural trans-based persons. And also, like, broadly in our trans movement, this is going to be a critical moment for us. And so these things speak to issues around delivery of education and quality education at that for trans and gender diverse persons, and making language more accessible. This also speaks to access to legal gender recognition, which needs to extend itself beyond the boundaries of what is effectively a very limited binary gender model currently, and moving into a space of a model of self-determination. And then also another big part of our advocacy work orientates itself obviously around the access to gender affirming healthcare. And so this book is really going to be valuable in in providing us with tools to strengthen the work in this area. We're trying to really work towards inclusive and making these effectively vital and basic services more accessible for rural-based trans and gender diverse persons at a primary healthcare level. As we close the session today, we at GDX, we just want to say thank you very, very much to our funders, Sahai and Astria, for making this project possible. And thank you to our implementation partners, She, Gaia Umbrella, Trans Wellness Project. Thank you so, so much. To our editors, Mia Strand, Estienne Smith, and our designer, Gabriel Germain Delarche. Thank you so much for all of your hard work in really bringing this book to life. And then finally, thank you to all of our co-authors, our participants who contributed so honestly and openly to this really incredible body of work. None of this would have been possible without you. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your contribution. Thank you for everybody for being here with us today. We really do appreciate you, appreciate your time. Just a reminder that the podcast for today's launch will be available on the GDX website later this week. And the Trans Rural Narratives book, as well as the poetry book, is available on our website currently. So please go ahead and download yourself a copy and enjoy. With that said, thank you very much for joining us again. Be safe, be well, have a lovely day further. Thank you so much.